He's editor-in-chief of Breitbart News and a New York Times best-selling author. And on this podcast, he brings deep research, prescient analysis, and world-class guests. He's Alex Marlow, and this is the Alex Marlow Show.
All right, welcome to the Marlow Show. Mike Benz is here. Mike and I have been talking about doing this for a long time. It was funny, Mike, you and I were texting back and forth about getting you on the show pretty recently, and then you were on Rogan's show, and then it seemed like you just became the biggest star in all of conservative media, and well-deserved, one of the hardest working guys. You were just telling me you have 5,000 tabs open at a given moment, so... if you want to know my secret to consuming all the information that he's able to internalize, but it's been a wild ride for you. You've been having fun?
Yeah, it's definitely been a wild ride. That's it's a roller coaster. There's been a lot of wins, and then every time we get a win in one area, they sort of move the battle upstream to a newer and more terrifying existential threat. So, it's riding on a knife's edge, but I'll miss it when it's gone. I mean, going back to normal politics where change is slow is, seems like a hard thing to go back to.
Well, this is one of the things that I've been trying to reinforce with people is that we need to stay in a war footing. We need to stay on a footing where we're trying to do as much as we can, as quickly as we can, because we've tried to be slow and calm and polite, and it's never worked for us. And it is, I have an example off the top of my head where it did work, but it rarely works. And what ends up happening is we end up losing opportunity. And I think that right now, given the speed of the internet, we're also able to make fools of the other side very quickly, which is a new development that I'm really enjoying, is that certain things like the Charlottesville hoax, for example, is that I think even now, I don't think that would have worked now. I think if it happened now, Biden would have been able to talk about that for years, because I think people would have figured out right away it was a hoax and we would have backed them off of it. And it just feels like this rapidly developing space. But you have a lot of areas of expertise, but I would say your number one is probably just internet freedom. And my first series of questions is, how are we doing in terms of internet freedom overall? I've got some micro questions, but on a macro level, just give me your 30,000 foot on how we're doing as a society.
In the U.S., we have done a phenomenal reversal of what looked like almost godlike control between the government, the advertisers, the civil society institutions like the university centers and NGOs that were hyper-fixated on creating an apparatus through their counter-disinformation ecosystem to control not just the players in the news media space, but the distribution of real-time narratives, the ability to bury scandals instantly, the ability to have hot topics totally controlled by one side of the narrative. That has been massively defunded at the government level. So it's been the motor engine of the censorship industrial complex is that word industrial. It's an industry.
Yes.
It's the same thing with an army. Everyone thinks about the explosive power of the bombers and, the quality of the guns that troops use. Well, if you can't pay troops, you don't have troops. Right. If you can't pay for the B-2 bomber, you don't have a B-2 bomber. And the government was the largest sponsor of the American censorship industry. And what the Trump admin has done really at warp speed has been just slashing and burning the grants and contracts that were the motor engine of that. And this has caused this, and as they've done that, they've also cut out the operations that the government was a part of through USAID, through the State Department, through DHS, through the National Science Foundation. The Biden White House had a 26 government agency interagency working group. It was called the White House Information Integrity Working Group. Information integrity is the big censorship catch-all. It means all information can be categorized into one of two categories: high integrity, anything that likes the Biden administration, and low integrity, anything that challenges it. And they could use this concept to create blacklists. We're still working on the advertiser issue. This has been the slowest thing to change because it's purely in the private sector on the one hand, insofar as how ads get served. And, government obviously can't compel a private entity to do commercial business. But the government was putting massive pressure on the advertisers, and government-sponsored NGOs were. We've gotten rid of that pressure at the U.S. government level, but you sort of have a clockmaker's dilemma, which is that, if the government hadn't created this, it wouldn't be ticking. But now, even if you get the government out of this, it still ticks to some extent on its own. And then you've got the international side of it, which is keeping the ticking going, in the sense that the EU, as well as a coterie of other countries, are working with out-of-power censors, U.S. censors in exile, to keep pressure on advertisers and to put more pressure on the platforms through this new EU Digital Services Act, whose code of practice on disinformation just went from voluntary to mandatory just on July 1st of this year. And that's going to have massive implications if the Trump White House does not apply the full gamut of diplomatic toolkit options. And I think of those as being trade, aid, arms, and tariffs. And I think that all that needs to be deployed.
So one thing I'm calling on, if you want to be in the censorship industry, I think you need to make an adjustment. You can't only have Orwellian titles. You can't only have, the Global Disinformation Index be the biggest liars on the planet. The GARM, the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, the least responsible group of people on earth. It's too obvious. So you guys are going to have to pick a new tactic. But one thing about Europe in particular, Mike, which is interesting, is that they don't have free speech as a value. Like, it's not a value of theirs. So there's nothing culturally here in the United States. We talk a big game about free speech, and then we don't do enough to protect it. But at least we kind of know we're supposed to try. Like in Europe, they don't even try, really. There are many choices when it comes to who you choose for your cell phone service. There was popping up all the time, new ones. But here's the truth. There's only one that boldly stands in the gap for every American that believes that freedom is worth fighting for, and that's Patriot Mobile. Not only are they leading the way in the red economy, but Patriot Mobile also outgains the competition when it comes to technology. It's one of the only carriers with access to all three major U.S. networks. That means exceptional nationwide coverage, along with the ability to have multiple numbers on different networks on a single smartphone. Folks, it's a game changer, and it's with Patriot Mobile. They also offer unlimited data plans, mobile hotspots, international roaming, internet backup, and so many more essential services. Switching's easier than ever. Activate in minutes from the comfort of your own home. Keep your number, keep your phone, or you can upgrade. It's time to make the switch today. It's easy to do. Go to patriotmobile.com/Alex or call 972-PATRIOT or use promo code Alex for a free month of service. That's patriotmobile.com/Alex. 972-PATRIOT is the phone number. Promo code Alex. Get that first free month. Get it done.
Right. Well, they still have it in the UN Declaration on Human Rights still has freedom of speech and freedom of expression as, basically international law encoded into that. And there's so there's basically supposed to be kind of head fakes in that direction. And so you'll always see this language in these sort of censorship program charter documents in Europe, where they'll say stopping the disinformation epidemic, the infodemic, while at the same time protecting freedom of expression. Yeah. But really what this means is they want to maintain privileged access for the journalists they like.
That's right.
While maintaining a censorship capacity for the journalists they don't. This is why
that's the whole game.
It is. That's why the EU, you may have seen a couple of months ago, they had their big International Press Freedom Day, and Ursula von der Leyen hauls out 100 NGO representatives, and they, do a whole kind of digital campaign parade over it. While at that, very moment, any journalist in Romania who was challenging any Western journalist or European journalist who was challenging the annulment of the election that the populist candidate won the first round of was being kicked out. At the same time, Germany was conducting hundreds of home raids in a morning against people for posting on social media. At the same time, media is being shut down in France, and at the time was being shut down in Poland. they like that. This is actually why some of the most pernicious folks in the censorship space are started out as free speech institutions, or they'll say like the Knight Foundation. The Knight Foundation's First Amendment Institute, for example, is like a great example of this.
Yeah.
It's all about the press freedom. And then Trump won in 2016. And they said, well, look, while we're in the business of sponsoring NGOs to coerce changes to media policy, why don't we play both sides of it? We'll get press freedom for us, and we'll campaign on censorship and information integrity and media literacy and digital resilience in order to stop the others. And that's why you have this First Amendment Institute funding the Stanford Internet Observatory.
Yeah.
And all these other and partnered, with the Biden administration on the counter disinformation task force. But, that is, as you said, that is the whole game, and we're taking the mask off of it.
Yeah, it is. Let's talk about the advertising industry for a second, because this is something that I've documented a lot, and particularly my first book, Breaking the News, but we've talked about this for years at Breitbart, that there was an effort out of the allegedly brand safety, there was a big effort to try to cut off conservative outlets from getting mainstream advertising because of alleged disinformation. It turned out everything we were reporting was true, and the New York Times was winning Pulitzers for reporting false stuff at the exact same moment. But that was how it was framed to advertisers, that you don't want to be associated with this sort of content. But what ended up happening is they're not all dumb people at these, at Toyota and at Coca-Cola and places like that. And they started to think, well, wait a minute. Well, if we're not going to be on that content, well, we shouldn't be on pandemic content. We shouldn't be advertising against war content. And all of a sudden, the entire advertising market in media dried up. And it took, the little engines that could, the Breitbarts of the world that operate on tight budgets and are always looking down the field at what's going to be the next attack on us. We were able to survive and do okay. And the rest of the media was just completely gutted, and mass layoffs. They continue to this day. It's total mystery how any of these stay in business unless you get a billionaire backer. And so where are we on that, Mike? Because it feels like the advertisers came back in some ways, those who are independent thinking and didn't want to be told what to do by left-wing bullies. But a lot of them are, I think, gone forever, and the industry will never be the same. Yeah.
Well, the history on that is completely fascinating, by the way. That was absolutely a top-down plan, specifically to go after the advertisers, including at the U.S. government level. But I guess before touching on that, in terms of where we are right now, this issue has gotten tremendous attention, thankfully, after all this time, from many parts of the Trump administration and Congress. The FTC just conditioned approval of the merger of two of the biggest ad tech players on a commitment to stop advertiser collusion, as well as retroactive cooperation with the FTC's ongoing investigation into advertiser collusion. The FTC has subpoenaed about 12 of these major advertiser pool brands and supply side advertisers for programmatic ad dollars. They know they're under pressure. They're having to incur legal fees for this. The merger, in theory, could be unwound if they do not cooperate with these terms over the next several years. Mm-hmm. And Congress has been fixated on this. The House Judiciary Committee just last week put out a 85-page preliminary report on advertiser collusion that was done by U.S. advertising conglomerates in conjunction with foreign governments like the UK Foreign Office and Australia. A lot of this is very deliberate, by the way. You'll have U.S. censors in exile in London and in Australia who know that they can't do this through the U.S. because of the First Amendment. What they call unclear legal authorities. And so they'll go directly to other countries to lead this effort. Nina Jankowicz, for example, is a great example of this. She was the head of our Disinformation Governance Board at DHS. Right. Of
course, those are Orwellian names, by the way. Disinformation Governance Board. All they do is provide disinformation.
And that's really in the end what sunk them, is being honest for once in their life with a name. Because before that, it was all run through the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. You fall halfway asleep. Nobody thinks you call something that people are too, even if they're, people didn't even pay attention to the real Ministry of Truth inside DHS. They were right about the Disinformation Governance Board. It was not the Ministry of Truth. It was actually just a dull, boring bureaucrat management layer to manage the Ministry of Truth that had already been created at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is like such a boring, dull, obfuscative, opaque set of words that no civilian could even imagine that would be, the quarterback of government censorship, basically an office set up to end run the First Amendment. But Nina Jankowicz, she just testified to the European Union earlier this year that they need to stand up not just against Russia, but against another authoritarian dictatorship, the United States of America. She became a registered agent for the British Crown when she left DHS. And went to work at the Center for Information Resilience. Another one of these things where it's like the information resilience. Who even knows what that means?
No one knows what that means, but I'll tell you, these are the least resilient people on earth, the people who can't handle anyone disagreeing with them at all. Like, let's censor them.
Well, this is what's so funny. The term resilience comes from their academic literature on disinformation about psychological resilience and psychological inoculation, but they don't want to put the word psychological in it. There's a funny episode, actually, where Stanford University, home of the Stanford Internet Observatory and the Stanford Cyber Policy Law Center, which does all this global censorship coordination, they brought the head of the Swedish Psychological Defense Agency to Stanford in 2023 to teach the Stanford censorship apparatchiks best practices learned from Sweden's censorship model. And they asked the guy who ran it, have you ever thought about changing your name? Psychological defense, that's sounds a little Orwellian. And the Swedish Psychological Defense Agency guy says, yes, actually, we thought quite a bit about the name. We originally picked this name, and then we received pushback from institutions and stakeholders, and we thought about going with another one, and then thought, well, no, let's just be honest. This is the end goal, and
wow.
And he's basically saying, listen, we are going to be honest about it, and we will sort of be responsive to the people about whether the Swedes are cool with that or not. At least they're honest autocrats in a weird way.
Yeah.
We have sort of the worst of both worlds here, where people don't even know that it's going on because there's this very Shakespearean, what's in a name? If she wasn't Montague, then maybe the marriage could have stuck, but they keep having to come up with more and more esoteric names every time one gets busted. It's kind of like, what they do to, dissidents on social media. It's every time they ban an account, the account has to come back under a new anonymous name. And that's sort of what they're doing with these censorship centers. But the Center for Information Resilience that Nina Jankowicz it's London based, and it does, did like lobbying, work for policy regulations around the information space. And it was funded by USAID. So you had U.S. government funding of a group that did the kind of work that the U.S. government couldn't do. And again, it was London based. It was actually Stephen Miller's America First Legal that broke the UK-US White House coordination on censorship policy. But what I'm getting at is there is a very powerful pushback on the advertisers in the U.S. The issue is advertising is a global market, and the EU is now cracking down on advertisers. The civil society organizations are maintaining pressure on it. But a lot of these advertisers, in addition to being sort of coerced by the Biden administration and by the Trump administration without him knowing about it through USAID. USAID had whole primers and annexes in the primers to their thousands of NGOs that they funded in the disinformation space. They actually had sample emails for the NGOs to write to emails. They called it advertiser stakeholder engagement letters in order to pressure the advertisers to not send fund, not allow their ads to appear and therefore monetize alternative news websites. And so that part of it has been taken out, but there's still a lot of counter pressure coming from beyond the U.S., which is why the sort of free speech diplomacy of Marco Rubio and the White House is so important. Just yesterday, Trump announced a 50% tariff on the government of on Brazil.
On Brazil, yeah.
And that, and citing the free speech attacks by the Brazilian government and their rogue court on U.S. social media companies. And I think that's what needs to be done with Europe. Yeah,
and people don't understand what's going on there is that Trump is bros with Bolsonaro, but also the left-wing courts there are even worse than our left-wing courts, and they're really do try to hijack that government. And Trump is making a very bold move there, and I think it's really interesting. He's really outside the box. You never would have seen something like that coming, but I really like it.
Well, there is a kind of irony there because those courts were all trained, encouraged, and even in no small part funded by the U.S. government to do this work. The USAID had a program called the Consortium for Elections and Political Process Strengthening, which basically, we doubled our USAID budget to Brazil while Bolsonaro was in power. Went from $31 million to Brazil to $68 million in Brazil in just the year, just 2018 to 2019. Mm-hmm. All that money didn't go to economically develop Brazil. It went to Bolsonaro's opposition. It was actually USAID and State Department funded NGOs that set up pretty much the entire censorship enterprise in Brazil from 2018 onward. And so there is kind of even the judges, the Alejandro de Moraes, the head of their censorship Supreme Court.
That's right.
He was literally trained in USAID CEPS programs on countering disinformation. The Atlanta Council, who was a part of the election integrity partnership, the group that censored the 2020 election, they went down to Brazil to teach them on the techniques for how they censored 2020 so that the courts could apply those techniques and use the technical expertise of the Atlanta Council in its digital forensics research lab.
And De Moraes, his main tactic is he accuses conservatives of pushing literally fake news, and he's been the number one guy going after Bolsonaro, trying to get him locked up. So it's actually a more of an accelerated version, which is hard to believe as bad as it got in America. It's the same stuff. It's the same exact playbook. It's just even more intense there.
Well, we wrote the playbook there, and it's more intense because they're applying the lessons learned, a streamlined version of it.
That's streamlined, right?
Yeah, I mean, and the depth of that is truly incredible. What happened? USAID, they have these internal documents. They had a countering disinformation network program, a civil society capacity builder network program at this USAID CEPS political process manipulation program. And what they did is they said, if we can't get countries to, they had this playbook, get countries to enunciate global principles on countering disinformation and then codify, get their parliaments and national assemblies to codify those principles into law. If we can't do that, go to what they called the EMBs, election management bodies. These are the bodies that determine elections in the event of disputes and also deal with things like election fraud. Like here in the U.S., that's the Supreme Court. That's our EMB. That's who decided Bush v. Gore, for example. Mm-hmm. And in Brazil, it's the STE, which is the sub-branch of their TSE. It's a sub-branch of they have a Brazilian Supreme Court. It's called the STF. And then they have a sub-branch of the Supreme Court called the TSE, which is specifically for administering elections. And so the EMB in Brazil is the TSE. And what they did is they said, basically, discourse impacts elections. And so you can simply have EMBs take over the disinformation apparatus in a country if the president won't take the censorship action we want, if the Congress won't take the censorship action they want. Because what the EMBs can do is they can say any discourse which is false or misleading, malinformation, it undermines the integrity of the election by polluting the information ecosystem. So this is how, for example, that TSE court has banned anyone from alleging that Lula is corrupt, banned anyone from comparing Lula to Maduro in Venezuela, banned anyone from airing a audio clip of the largest drug cartel in Brazil, saying to police interrogators that he hoped that Lula would win the election because it would be better for his own enterprise. Because what the EMB, the election management body in Brazil, says is that discourse changes who people vote for on the basis of misleading information. And so as part of our election administration, we get control of all speech in society inside election season or out. And USA literally had 26, they would do like 4 or 5 day international conferences where they'd bring 26 different country EMB representatives together to all commonly collude to try to install those powers in their own countries. This is basically like a way for the State Department to get godlike control over who wins any election anywhere on planet Earth.
Yeah, that's it. And that's what's happening. And it's good that we got people like you looking out for it, Mike. I want to go through a few tech. I want to do some just the free speech realm. I want to go through and get your take on a few of the major players here. So Mark Zuckerberg basically bought the 2020 election for Joe Biden and then had this MAGA Mark makeover. He's just like all these tech guys. He's got a bit of a futurist streak in him. In retrospect, it was very obvious Trump was going to win. So it would have been very smart and calculating for him to do this, to try to act more moderate and to just have a bit of a glow up with his sort of dorky and dated, the old persona. But is any of it genuine? And do you think he's embraced free speech at all? Or is it all an act he'll drop? Are you satisfied with the direction he's moving in? All right, we know that good coffee is kind of easy to find. There's a lot of good coffee out there, but great coffee, that's a different story. And when I was introduced to Crockett Coffee, I knew this was something special. This is roasted to perfection in small batches on purpose by experts who love the taste of great coffee and are conscientious about how it's made and who's making it. It's roasted in our nation's heartland and it's delivered fresh to your home. When you enjoy Crockett Coffee, you're also supporting an anti-communist, pro-American brand of coffee founded by our friends Clay Travis and Buck Sexton, who are good broadcasters and are apparently dang good at making a cup of coffee as well. The perfect type of thing to sip at a mountain campfire like a Western settler or in your office while you're doing a podcast. It is just really high quality stuff. You guys know I'm a coffee snob, married to an Italian. I like to hit that dark roast. They also sent me some mild roast, which was delicious. They got a light roast, they got a decaf, they got a mushroom organic blend. That's the new hotness. They got K-Cups, lots of different options for you. And part of your support goes to Tunnel to Towers Foundation, which is a great way to give back and remind people that Crockett Coffee, people there, they pledge to never forget. Easy, go online, crockettcoffee.com, Crockett like it as in Davy Crockett, crockettcoffee.com. Use my first name, Alex. You get 20% off your first order. That's crockettcoffee.com. Use my name, Alex, as the promo code for 20% off. Good people and a dang good cup of coffee. You guys know I would not endorse it if it wasn't quite delightful.
I know I always get pilloried when I say this, but I actually think it's 100% genuine. And I think that
that's great. No, we're in a free speech space here in the Marlow Show, Mike, so I'd love to hear it.
Well, I'm charging into it anyway. I just, but comment section, let me defend myself here, okay?
Please.
I think that Zuckerberg actually has if not identical, a very, very similar set of kind of libertarian, live and let live, free market of ideas kind of concept that Elon, sort of holds up as the sword on this. The difference in their sort of diametrically opposite paths on this has been not really about what's in their mind, but what's in their spine. Zuckerberg in 2019, I remember the chair I was sitting in when I was watching this. He did a 2019 speech. At the time, I was already, kind of I was already like professionally committed to, this taking on this censorship apparatus at that time. And had been chronicling all the censorship activity that Facebook had been doing between 2016 and 2019. And he gave this exasperated speech in 2019. I think it was at Georgetown, or he did another one in, I think, San Jose on this, where he said that the pendulum had swung too far towards censorship on Facebook, and that he wanted and intended for it to swing back towards free speech. And this was after, the Russiagate pressure on Facebook. Basically, the CIA, the FBI, ODNI, DHS all swooped on Facebook. Congress completely pilloried Facebook and held them personally responsible for allowing Trump to get elected. You had civil society, NGOs, advertisers. But just weeks after Zuck made that speech, they changed the terms campaign. This was a advertiser boycott campaign. It's called #Change the Terms, and it referred to the terms of service. This was basically a giant advertiser boycott campaign that ended up sucking $60 billion of market cap out of Facebook in just about 2 months. And on the back of that, Zuckerberg, even after just giving these speeches about how he thought there was too much censorship pressure on Facebook and they need to stick up for themselves and go back to free speech, he then doubled down on the censorship and censored harder than ever. But this is because Zuckerberg was not willing to risk the blows to the financial model and the potential cascade when you're talking about tens of billions of dollars, and you've got all these, investments and initiatives in the work and staff. You can collapse like a house of cards, even if the $60 billion doesn't bankrupt you.
Right.
The $60 billion can set in motion those events. And remember, at that time, I actually blame a lot of the Facebook action pre-2022 on us rather than Zuck. And again, I know the comment section.
Okay, but specify, what did we do?
Who stuck up for Zuck at that point? When there was nobody, I was screaming, doing weekly pilgrimages. I was a lawyer at the time. I wasn't even in Washington, and I was taking trains down constantly to try to brief people on the fact that the government had I would do these slide decks. This one, it was like 192 slides. It was like my stock presentation. And the very first slide of it was an image, and I posted this image on my X account. It was an image that said, "What you think censorship looks like," and it's a little guy with a giant 1984 boot coming over his neck, and he's looking up, and he sees Mark Zuckerberg's face, and it says, and that's slide one. It says, "What you think censorship looks like." And then slide two was what censorship actually looks like, and it was Zuckerberg as the little guy with the giant boot. And he's looking up, and the owner of the boot is the Blob. It's the foreign policy establishment. It was the State Department, USAID, the Department of Defense, the Central Intelligence Agency, the FBI, DHS, and all of their funded NGOs in the information space, including in the advertiser space, to crush Zuck unless he put his boot on us. And Zuck was completely alone in that. The Republican Congress was crushing him over Russiagate. The Trump administration abjectly refused to acknowledge the censorship issue. I wrote the speech for Trump in summer 2020 on censorship after pulling a lot of teeth to even get an event on censorship. And Trump didn't even read the remarks on it. In fact, he doubled down after seeing that the topic was censorship. He looked up from the paper and said, everyone talks about censorship like it's this big deal. Let them try. They tried to stop me in 2016. They tried to censor me in the media. It won't work. And, I thought this was this moment where, like, okay, now 300 million Americans are going to, I had all the statistics, all the chronology, all the evolution. They weren't interested. It was not until Trump himself started having a limited visibility on his own tweets, where you got those click-through interstitials and fact-check false and all of that, that they started to go, oh, wow, censorship's a real thing. If you remember, Republicans, mainline Republicans, and again, at this time, most of the Republican Congress was not really bought into Trumpism at that time. But basically, yeah, Zuck had no help anywhere. And, I think when Elon got in the game, it was also contemporaneous with COVID had already happened. Everyone had already experienced the censorship. There were mass revelations ongoing about the impact of the censorship apparatus on conservative and independent voices. But, Zuck was really first through the gate on this, and no one had his back I think he's felt this way all along, but he was never the biggest difference is Elon Musk at the end of the day was willing to sit in front of the world and hold up double barrel middle fingers and say to the advertisers, F you. And he was willing, and when he was asked, "Are you what happens if X goes under because of that?" His answer was not, "Okay, I'll appease them. I'll do it to save my baby." His response was, "Well, then X will go under, and Earth will watch. The world will watch," and that's really the difference. I think when Trump and Jim Jordan provided political cover. But a lot of this was also just because the Biden administration just failed crony capitalism 101. I don't think Zuck would have made that switch to the Trump side if Biden had actually been a good, kind of, cronyism. If he was good at cronyism and corruption. I mean,
yeah, I know, but this is really interesting because I've thought about this a lot. It seemed like the way that Biden dealt with Zuckerberg was very ham-fisted, and I feel like it was too authoritarian. The way, at least, I'm getting it secondhand, obviously, but from what I was able to glean from media reports on it and from Zuckerberg's interviews on it, it just sounded like he was not reasonable at all. It was not even it wasn't a wink and a nudge. It was basically, you're going to do this, you're going to behave in the way that we desire. And as someone who I don't know a lot of billionaires, Mike, but I know more than your average person, they don't like being told what to do. That's across the board. It's one thing they don't like. They didn't get where they got so that people can just call them up and say, you will do this. That seems to be the number one way to get them on your bad side.
I think that's true. I think they're willing to play ball and do business, so to speak.
Yes, always do business, always cut deals.
But it's a business transaction. And this is where the Biden administration, they were so comfortable with this arrangement because they had pushed and pushed and pushed, and Facebook always caved and caved and caved. But one of the big reasons that Zuck threw his weight behind Biden in 2020 was because of the threats from Democrats in Congress, Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, as well as the State Department folks negotiating with the EU around the EU Digital Markets Act and Digital Services Act. They were told. I mean, I have them on video. I have the exact network who put this pressure on Facebook. It was led by the former Facebook chief security officer, Alex Stamos, and the EIP election censorship group that was given the special partnership with DHS to censor all election misinformation. They did this autopsy Zoom call after they successfully pulled off the censorship operation for the 2020 election. And they took credit for getting Facebook to censor Trump World by saying we leveraged the existential regulatory stakes that we put them under. They basically described the kind of three-part pressure that they put: government pressure, advertising pressure, and media pressure. And then they put all the different companies into boxes, and then they forced them all to sort of match the changes that the one did. But they said that they would not have taken these proactive steps without this government entity. I mean, they were the DHS designated disinformation partner doing this, but there was no counterpressure from Republicans. No one from the Republican side ahead of the 2020 election threatened Facebook's business model if they went through with censorship. And there's a much better claim for threatening the carrots and sticks of government government good graces and bad graces for something that infringes on the spirit of the First Amendment, than something that supports it. I think this pressure should have been applied in reverse as it currently is, but Republicans were not in the game at all. And not only that, I mean, what really I think tipped it is Facebook has been getting hit with billions of dollars in fines from the EU, assuming that after they played ball with the Biden foreign policy establishment and the Democrats, that Biden would fight for them, that the Biden State Department would protect them from Australia, from Canada, from the EU. I mean, a lot of these, Canada has basically now extorted the social media companies to pay mainstream news websites because the journal, the revenue models for journalists, they argue, are being usurped by the social media companies because they're hosting news and then the advertising is sort of trickle down through there. And so they were sliced and diced instead of rewarded. After you extort someone, it's good to give them a little tap on the butt and say, "Attaboy, here's a bone, good dog." But they never even threw the bone. They just thought they could keep milking the cow, and eventually, I think the cow was getting so skinny and pissed off. It was like, you know what? I never really liked this guy squeezing my udders anyway. Let me go to greener pastures.
All right, Michael, I want to run through. I got a ton that I want to get through with you, and you're endlessly interesting. And so I want to go a little. I want to get a couple rapid takes on tech, and then I want to move on to some non-tech stuff. So X right now, it seems to be kind of split. A lot of the platform is a lot of Musk super fans here, and the people who are engagement farming, and then others are, really, I think, taking advantage of it becoming a more open free speech space. What do you think is the trends going on X right now? And what do you think of the platform in this era where now Trump and Musk are not getting along?
Well, it's also early. It's hard to sort of pierce through the fog of war. Just yesterday, the CEO of X, Linda Yaccarino, stepped down.
Yeah.
Nobody there. There's. I'm assuming that there's an NDA involved, and that the kind of official public story on this will not be told anytime soon. I think Linda did an incredible job stewarding X through, probably the most acute existential crisis in global free speech, maybe in human history. The fact is I think a lot of people, myself included, were skeptical when we heard, this relatively unknown figure in terms of, day-to-day politics or culture, Linda Yaccarino, coming from the World Economic Forum, specifically from the advertising and partnership branch of it. Media partnership and advertisements was her portfolio there. Elon had just, I think, weeks before he picked her as CEO, railed against the World Economic Forum as a kind of unofficial global government that no one voted for. But it was clear that they had a kind of synergy, and I was constantly impressed by Linda having Elon's back as he did the fights with the advertisers, but then also being a kind of liaison who could speak the language. Because at the time, I think one of the reasons they allowed the merger under Elon is Elon was talking the same game that Zuck was talking, and that Jack Dorsey was talking. Jack Dorsey called Twitter the free speech wing of the free speech party before he ended up. Everyone talks a big game. It's like the Mike Tyson quote: "Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth." They thought, yeah, okay, Elon's gonna, talk a big game about free speech, but let's see what happens when they lose all their advertising dollars. Let's see what happens when 11 different companies of his are under regulatory investigation, and we can turn him. And the fact is that the national security state was dependent on Elon's other properties like Starlink and Tesla for a lot of its own statecraft. So there's, I think, a limited amount that could be done relative to some of the other tech titans. But I think that Linda sticking up at that acute moment in time and sort of being from that world. Obviously, X lost like 80% of its advertisers during the initial blackout foray, but then slowly they got, I think, probably 75% of them back. I think I remember seeing something around that figure about 6 months ago. And that has been trench warfare, brand by brand, partnership by partnership. Now they're hosting, NFL and MLB and tennis, and I think they've done a fantastic job in what seemed like an impossible tightrope walk to manage. In terms of what comes, obviously there's a synergy with AI, and I think
this is kind of where I thought Musk always had a chance to make this thing work. Is not just is X sustainable, but it's also that it's a huge megaphone for his other businesses. Everyone became completely obsessed with his rocket ships once he took over X. Like that was the mean, we knew he'd rocket chips, but I don't think the obsession was the same until people were watching him on the X platform, he could curate the algorithm so that they were at the top of everyone's feed. And for 40 billion, that's your right. You should be absolutely do that. If I get 40 billion, I buy X, I'm going to put all my stuff at the top too. So it seemed like that was an ace up his sleeve that seemed to work out well. But I want to ask you about next CEO for X. Do you think you have any idea who that could be? I mean, I'm an outside the box guy. I think you would do a good job. Do you know Elon? Have you ever talked to him about it? Because you'd be a perfect guy to put in charge of it.
I think that would be that'd probably be the funnest job in the world. And I actually think that Linda had a lot of fun. I've met Linda at different gala events and the like, and I'm happy that Elon has amplified so much of my content, and kind of honored by that. There's been no one who's reached out to me about any sort of particular role at X there. I think I kind of feel my role is kind of inside outside on a lot of these things. I fundamentally kind of I think at my best when I'm outside something, able to work with folks on the inside so that I can maintain kind of independence and kind of watchdog capacity and the ability to kind of see peripheral threats that you simply don't have time to if you are managing. I mean, the issue, the CEO role is a managerial one. I spend my whole day basically in a cave in my little sort of fortress of solitude, basically studying the things that they're confronted by and trying to spot all the angles and developments. I would not be able to do that at the level that I do now if I were to have to manage it's a lot of company work with 10,000 employees or whatever it is. And
I don't think you have a lot of time to think in a job like that. I think you probably have a lot of tasks on your plate.
Yeah. Crisis. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask you about the AI of it all, because Grok's had a tough week, but then it relaunched with the new Grok that everyone likes, but it sounded like it was channeling its inner Kanye for a while. And we're all prepared to outsource a lot of stuff to AI, but what if it doesn't go well? What if the AI moderation, AI calling all the shots? What if AI is wrong about a bunch of stuff? And then it's going to be really complicated unwinding that web, because it's so easy to use for so many ways. What's your thoughts on this current state of AI during this rapid gold rush that we're in right now?
Well, I think because it's a very, very, very new market, and we're just at the very beginning of this. And the market will ultimately, decide on those things. When an AI goes completely overboard or consistently getting something wrong, I think that's when you're going to see, advertisers, consumers, government enterprise users pick winners and losers in the market on the basis of the models that they think are best. And so while I think that there will be a kind of niche market for edgy AI and for esoteric, AI that kind of always gives a kind of partisan or slanted twist to whatever your query is. I could see one, like, for example, like a kind of Grok or ChatGPT that's more centered on the occult, right? You could imagine like a market for that, and where you ask about the mating patterns of a African swallow, and it spits out its connections. I think that is going to be, you're going to see a kind of striation in AI where you're going to have these sort of big catch-all Google search substitutes, like ChatGPT. Is I think the biggest threat to Google search. I think there was the emergency meetings. I think when ChatGPT 3 was first rolled out, you saw this giant kind of in-house crisis at the Google C-suite that Google had to triple down on the on a competitor to it, because it does. I mean, it really does replace search much better. I mean, if you think about, I've been using this, the kind of AI chatbot, AI search, the sort of Grok and ChatGPT to replace traditional search engine searches for the past few months here, and it's hard to imagine ever going back. I mean, search
it's much better because it helps you synthesize too. It starts the curation process. It doesn't complete the curation process, but it starts it, and so that's why we got to be. There's a big social responsibility to try to get it right as fast as we can. It's hard to do, but it's such a powerful tool, and it'll be tough to track it all. Mike, we got about 10 more minutes together, and I want to talk about Epstein a little bit with you. Because it does connect to the USAID stuff, which you have talked about better than anyone and have reported on better than anyone. Were you alarmed by basically the news that we're not getting answers and the government, which I for my audience, I had always told them that we're not getting answers here. It's not going to happen. And I just, as great as Trump is, and I like Cash and I like Dan, I never thought we'd get answers on this. And it was sort of a sixth sense. I couldn't tell you exactly why, but I always knew that this was going to be a disappointment. But the online right is just absolutely apoplectic over this. Help me contextualize why it's so important to the conservative grassroots to get answers, and just your thoughts on why you think we're not getting the truth. The media is broken. For decades, big cable and legacy media have filtered information to hide the truth. That's why America's trust in mass media is at an all-time low. But new media is breaking through with podcasts, places like Breitbart. We're doing it in increasing numbers. 100 million Americans now listen to a podcast every week. That's crazy. 70% listen to podcasts on their mobile devices, which is great. I know that's how I listen. But big cable has one major way to control information, and that's access. They do this by limiting something called spectrum. Those are the invisible airwaves that power affordable wireless internet, and by forcing you into their bundles, keeping independent media out of reach. Leaders in Congress like Senator Ted Cruz are working to expand spectrum access for more Americans. President Trump expanded access to spectrum in his first term and has endorsed the plan to reduce our deficit by billions of dollars by doing it again now. Conservative leaders like Stephen Moore have argued it's a perfect fit for President Trump's economic agenda. All of this is something that is on the cutting edge, and we want to get you all the information you need to understand what's going on and how you can take advantage of it. EndTheCableopoly.org is the website. EndTheCableopoly.org for more information. You tell your senator, tell your member of Congress to work with Senator Cruz, work with President Trump, and work to end the legacy media's monopoly on spectrum. EndTheCableopoly.org.
Well, because it's a Hollywood movie that's been playing out. It's kind of been, the best movie in town for like 6 years. I mean, everything about the Epstein story is so larger than life. There's something for everyone. It's a film for all audiences. If you're into, crazy, sex stories, if you're into, saving the children, if you're into high finance, if you're into, Bill Gates conspiracy theories, if you're into, the Democrats are corrupt, if you're into the Republicans are corrupt, if you're into the Justice Department. I mean, every layer of the Epstein story has not only something for everyone, but also seems to get to the highest levels of government power, of international alliance government power. I think that people walk around because our country is the greatest country on earth, but we are probably the keeper of many of the world's greatest secrets. And in order to keep those secrets, you need to tell noble lies. And when enough noble lies stack on top of enough noble lies, I think so many Americans walk around thinking, the system is not, there's something off about the system, but I can't quite put my finger on it. And then they see the Epstein story and they go, is that connected to this feeling that I have that everything's a little bit upside down and there's something they're not telling me? And, a lot of this was because the Epstein story has been a political hot potato that is used by the party that's out of power in order to attack the party that's in power for not doing enough, for not doing more than they did while they were in power. I mean, everyone talks about Epstein and Bill Clinton, for example, because, there's just so much there between them traveling together and the Lolita Express and the money bundling. But Epstein started with Reagan. It started with the Reagan Republicans. That was, he was, a lot of his, biggest early backers were people active in the Republican Party. And, it's been a bipartisan thing. And I think MAGA world saw what happened in 2019 with the death in the prison cell. And they said, okay, Bill Barr is corrupt, just like Christopher Wray at FBI is corrupt. It's not Trump. It's not Trump world, though. And then they saw the Democrats, continue to cover it up. And Joe Biden, they said, okay, it's the rhinos and Democrats, basically. And I think the way that was teed up to the American public, because it was such a campaign issue. I mean, Trump talked about it on the campaign. J.D. Vance was tweeting about it every other week on it. Cash, was, going in on it. Dan was going in on it. Pam Bondi, was I think every major player in Trump world promised us at least a genuine effort, because everyone knew, listen, they might not have the files. They're not going to just, keep this thing on the digital system. They're not going to, keep paper records of this, but that they would satisfy that the ends of the earth had been scoured to get answers. And the way this has developed and unfolded has been, it's not like Tulsi Gabbard at ODNI with JFK, I think, set the gold standard on this. I don't think anyone was – a lot of people were disappointed in the JFK files. I thought they were absolutely phenomenal. I learned so much about the structure of rogue statecraft from so many angles. I think it's absolutely historic what was done in March. In fact, I learned a lot about even – things around the Epstein network from the JFK files. But the fact is they were completely unredacted, and it was exhaustive. They put like 60,000 files, totally unredacted, on a government website, and said, here's what we saw. Now you see it with your own eyes. Make up your own mind. There has been not a single document disclosure in now 6 months of the Trump administration. Pam Bondi was asked yesterday in the press conference at the White House whether or not Alex Acosta, the DOJ official, whether it was true that Epstein was, quote, belonged to intelligence. And Pam Bondi's response was, I don't have knowledge of that, but I'll try to revert to you with an answer. It's like, okay, 6 months in, what have you done? I mean, in my view, if they want to satisfy the American voters on this, because I think this is going to be a 2026 voter turnout issue. I think that this is something very visceral, and the working assumption is there's something in there, or there's a lot of things in there that even the guys you thought you liked don't want to get out. I'm not going to be that enthusiastic voting for them again. I'm not going to necessarily vote for a Democrat if I'm a MAGA person on the basis of it. But you know what? There's a lot of good sports going on election day, and it kind of pissed me off. So I'm kind of abstaining. That's what I fear is going to happen.
Yeah, me too. So what can be done? Can anything be done to try to get to some sort of a satisfying equilibrium?
Yes, I'm actually going to be publishing a video tonight of exactly what DOJ can do to get answers on this, or to at least show that they've done the good faith. And I'll give you a quick preview of this. So, the DOJ has something called OPR, the Office of Professional Responsibility, which is basically the in-house ethics office at DOJ. In November 2020, OPR did a review of the Jeffrey Epstein plea deal struck in 2008, and specifically interrogated Alex Acosta's plea deal and the the strange and seemingly highly unusual, I'll be charitable, set of circumstances that gave rise to that sweetheart plea deal. And that was 2 weeks. It was November 2020. Bill Barr was still the head of the DOJ, even though Trump had just lost the election. And this was the kind of DOJ in-house investigation to put the Epstein story to bed. It's very hard to find this document online, by the way. It's no longer on DOJ's website. They have a 13-page executive summary, but they put out a 348-page report. I downloaded it. I scoured it this week, and it's a fascinating document. It was widely reported after this in November 2020 that Epstein was that Alex Acosta had walked back his statement that Epstein belonged to intelligence, and so therefore Epstein is not CIA. And we know this because of this DOJ ethics investigation where the ethics investigators talked to Alex Acosta and got his on-record statements. When you go into the report, it turns out they weren't even asking Alex Acosta about CIA or foreign intelligence. They were talking about a intelligence asset in connection with a unrelated white-collar FBI informant role that it was speculated that Epstein may have played. They never even asked him the direct question on it, and they never even told us what questions they asked. It's a 348-page document, and the discussion of Jeffrey Epstein's intelligence ties are relegated to a single footnote on a single page. It's page 169, footnote 244. Here's what Pam Bondi could do immediately. This is all preserved records, we're told, unless a technological glitch has wiped this out. 11 months of Alex Acosta's DOJ emails were wiped from the servers, by the way, beginning May 2007, the very month that the FBI wanted to arrest Epstein. But the fact is in order to do that investigation, the White House OPR, the DOJ OPR, the ethics folks, would have had to have had transcribed interviews of Alex Acosta, kept on record in order to get his statements under penalty of perjury about what he asked. Make those make those transcripts public. You run the DOJ. OPR it reports as a very interesting chain of command. It reports directly to the Attorney General of the United States. So that office is directly controlled by or directly run by the Attorney General of the United States. Pam Bondi could simply walk down to OPR tonight and demand that the transcripts of Alex Acosta about Jeffrey Epstein's ties to intelligence be made public. You could review them for, scrub sources and methods if you want, and if you want to do a partially redacted one in order to protect the names of particular, agents or investigators. But make that document, show us that we can see what you see if you want us to trust what you say.
Mike, fantastic. It's a great place to start, but there's a lot of work to do here. This is one that I'm really concerned about the coalition in this regard, because there's a lot of people who are new to the movement who are disappointed here, and that's to be taken very seriously. Mike, you've shown great leadership in the movement. We love having you, and hopefully we can do a part 2 and a part 3 and a part 4 of these soon, but I know we both got to run, so that'll be it for today. At Mike Benz Cyber on Twitter, he's got a YouTube. I will be watching it to get the full explanation later of what the DOJ needs to do. You all should do that too. So find his YouTube, Mike Benz Cyber, again for that as well. And keep up the good work, my friend.
Thanks, Alex. Talk soon.